welcome to Tea Time with Mrs. Santa. I am so excited you're here today. Happy spring! I just love this time of year. My greenhouse is full of flowers in bloom, and of course I had to bring them into my parlor and decorate my tree for spring. It just makes me happy and I feel all warm inside. And we have a special guest. This is Mr. Frost. Did I ever tell you how I met Mr. Frost? I didn't. Oh my goodness. I have to tell you that story of how I met Mr. Frost. When I was a little girl, my dad decided he wanted to move way up north. And so off he went and he started to build a little tiny house for us just to start off until he could build a bigger house. And when he was done with that little house, he sent for my mom and my brother and me, and we all moved up north. And it was so different. My dad would say we lived between nothing and nowhere. Literally, because there was nothing around us, there was nowhere to go, and there was no one around us. It was just nature and us, and it was quite an adventure. I learned to build walls and put shingles on a roof, so I learned quite a few new things. But one spring day was very special. My dad had to go and get more supplies, so that meant he was going to be gone a few days, so I could go off and explore the woods all by myself. But my dad always told me to be careful in the woods, and that if I ever run across any bears, that I should never run and lay down on the ground and pretend I'm sleeping. Especially if I ran across a mean polar bear. And he was a grouchy, mean polar bear. And my dad didn't like me always to walk around by myself, but he did build me this awesome tree fort in a grove of pines that I called the Enchanted Pine Forest. And I believed those trees would talk to me. And they were so beautiful because they would glisten in the snow that was on the branches. And I loved going to my tree fort and having afternoon tea parties. And today was a beautiful day, and that's what I did. As I took that walk, and it's a pretty good walk, maybe just a mile or so into the woods, and off I went. And the snow had a little crunch. It wasn't all melted yet, but there was still enough snow that I had to bundle up. And I had the most magical afternoon having afternoon tea parties with my pine tree friends. But the sun was moving across the land, and I knew it was time to go home before it got dark. And I opened the door, and all of a sudden I saw my cat, Jingle Bells. Jingle Bells got his name because we had to put a bell on his collar because he was so quiet. When he moved, he would sneak up on us and it would scare us, so you could hear him coming. But when I opened the door, I heard Jingle Bells coming, and he just jumped up on my shoulder and he dug his claws right in there, and his hair was on the back of his neck, and he was hissing, he was meow, and I knew something was wrong. And I felt the pine trees telling me that to be very careful. So I took a deep breath, and off I went, and I walked as quickly as possible in the snow, and crunch, 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 crunch. And I kept looking from right to left. I didn't see anything, so I started to feel better, but Jingle Bells was still hissing on my shoulders. And I thought, okay, well maybe he was just being silly. And then all of a sudden I heard a snap. I thought, oh no, I look right and left again and I didn't see anything, but I was getting scared now, and Jingle Bells let off another meow. And so I walked a little faster, crunch, 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 crunch. And now I heard something else. I heard a louder crunch. Crunch, 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 crunch. And I looked to the right, and I looked to the left, and I saw the mean polar bear. He was off on the left side of me. He was about 200 feet away. I was so scared. And I remembered my dad told me not to run and that I should lay down on the ground and pretend I'm sleeping. But I stopped because I was frozen in fear. And when I stopped, the mean polar bear stopped. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to lay down on the ground. And I'm not going to run, but I'm going to keep walking. So I took another step, crunch, and another one, crunch, and another one, crunch. And the mean polar bear did the same thing. Crunch, 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 crunch. And he kept walking beside me. I was scared, but I kept walking. And I knew if I could get up to the birch grove, which my dad and I would call the whispering birches, and it was a maze of tall birch trees. And I thought if I could get into that grove of birch trees, I could maybe lose the mean polar bear, because you have to weave in and out and you have to know how to get through it. And I knew how to get through it. So I walked a little faster, crunch, 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 crunch. And so did the mean polar bear. Crunch, 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 crunch. Oh my goodness, my heart was just beating so fast. And I got into the birch grove. And I weaved in and out as fast as I could, and I looked over my shoulder, and the mean polar bear was getting behind. He couldn't keep up. So I went faster, weaving in and out I came of the birch grove. And I could see if I could just get around to the bend, and on top of the hill, I could see our little house, which is at the bottom of the hill. I thought, oh, if I could just get there. So I go as fast as I could while mean polar bear was back in the birch grove, and I'm running as fast as my little feet could go. Crunch, 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 crunch. And then all of a sudden, I heard the mean polar bear. He was catching up. Crunch, 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 crunch. Oh, I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't even thinking anymore. And we went around the bend, and the mean polar bear was still walking beside me, keeping up the same pace. But now I'm on top of the hill, and I see our little house. And I thought if I could just get into my house and shut that door, I would be okay. I took another deep breath. My heart was beating so fast, and Jingle Bells on my shoulder was just hissing and roaring. He was hanging on for dear life. And I took off running, crunch, 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 as fast as my little feet could go. And I could hear the mean polar bear, crunch, crunch, crunch. And the ground was shaking. It felt like the earth was moving from his paws landing on the ground. But I kept my focus, and I kept running as fast as I could. And Jingle Bells is hanging on so tight. And I get to the door, hurry up, open the door, slam the door shut, and Jingle Bells went flying off my shoulder and went and ran up the stairs. And I turned around to look out our picture window, and there was the mean polar bear. And he stood up on his hind legs all the way up. He was so big, like a giant. And he put his paws on the window, and he started shaking it, and I could feel it shaking and seeing it. And then, you know what happened? Guess what he said? I just want to have a tea party with you. Can't we share a cup of tea together? And I went, oh, I couldn't believe my ears. And you know what I did? You're right. I opened up the door and I invited the mean polar bear in for a cup of tea. And I changed his name to Mr. Frost. And every spring he comes and visits me, and we have an afternoon tea party together. Isn't that great? I know, and he loves tea as much as I do. So I think we should get our teacups out and have a tea together with Mr. Frost. You ready? All right, we're going to take time to pour some tea. You ready, Mr. Frost? And one for me. Don't forget to pour your cup of tea. I'm going to help Mr. Frost because he's got big paws, so sometimes it's hard to hold a teacup. You ready, Mr. Frost? What was that? He said that was a great cup of tea. He's really shy, and you have to listen real carefully to hear him talk. Now my turn. That is so good. I am so glad you came today and that I could share my story with you on how I met Mr. Frost. Don't forget to check out our website at michigansbestsanta.com and mrssantas.com. And don't forget to look at my YouTube channel, Mrs. Santa, for more wonderful stories and arts and crafts. And of course, cup of tea. I hope you have a very merry day. Bye-bye.